So, hi everyone, I am Priscilla. I am a first year graduate student at the University of Michigan, advised by Professor Westley Weimer. And I'm presenting on behalf of Madeline and Endres and my advisor on some work we did on analyzing some sex differences in computer teaching evaluations. But first, I want to explain what are these teaching evaluations and why do we care to analyze them. So the use of student teaching evaluations is one way institutions evaluate their professors, particularly their teaching quality. In short, student teaching evaluations are forms students submit at the end of the course term in which they rate their professor's teaching quality on a range of criteria. Once all student evaluations are collected, the professor gets an aggregate score. At the end, we wound up with each professor getting their own teaching score. And these scores can affect the professors, since institutions use these scores to help them determine things like tenure, promotions, funding, and more crucial benefits. Now, there is some debate whether these scores should be used to evaluate professors, but that can be saved for a later discussion. Nevertheless, because institutions do use these scores to determine important aspects of a professor's career, we would like to expect these scores to efficiently and correctly reflect teaching quality, such as higher scores should indicate good quality teaching and vice versa. But of course, in reality, unfortunately, biases exist in student teaching evaluations. They do not exactly reflect the teaching quality of our professors. The literature, of course, has seen this impact female professors across universities, with female professors reported to score lower than their male counterparts. And this leads to many disadvantages, such as impacting the promotions for women, encouraging stereotypes, and impact the representation of women in the field. And that's, of course, just to name a few. And then if the literature can note high biases in general for female professors, how bad do you think they could be in individual departments, like we had been talking about in this entire workshop? How bad is it in computer science? Well, a previous study examining online student ratings motivated us to look into more institutional student teaching evaluations. And the study we are referring to is from Gordon and others, in which they looked at biases in Weimer Professor ratings. As a bit of a background, Weimer Professor is an online public forum that allows students to rate their professor online on various criteria. Now, students have an option to rate the professor. They're not obligated to share their opinions about the professor on this online forum. Now, the authors of this particular study focused on scores for professors teaching only computer science, and the ratings would range from 1 to 5, 1 being the worst and 5 being the best. And of course, what they found was not surprising. Women are rated lower than men in overall teaching quality, as noted on the bar graph, where men are in blue and women are in pink. Even further, they found that these biases are even held true when populations were separated into races. Minority women are rated lower than minority men, and white women are rated lower than white men. Well, in summary, they found that these biases exist, gender biases exist in the ratings of computer science professors. And if these biases exist in online teaching ratings, there is no reason to not hypothesize that these biases could exist in student evaluations submitted formally at universities. So with this hypothesis in mind, our goal was to further examine the magnitude of sex bias in computer science student teaching evaluations at a large public institution, particularly the University of Michigan. So from 327 professors teaching in the fall of the Computer Science and Engineering Division, we collected all their anonymous student evaluations that made up their overall teaching score. And then we evaluated those scores for the existence of sex biases. Just for clarity, although our primary focus was to investigate the biases that may exist in the evaluations for computer science professors, we also investigated non-CS engineering professors just to aid in that comparison. We also looked at evaluations submitted for non-professors, or what we would call student instructors, and these include students who are instructional aides and teaching assistants, because here at the University of Michigan, students are also allowed to evaluate those student instructors. Finally, because the University of Michigan does not collect information on gender from their professors, we ended up using sex as a proxy for gender bias. Now, with that in mind, we introduced 3 research questions to help us evaluate our findings. So you'll first look into 1 and 3, excuse me. was the sex of computer science instructors correlated with the average teaching evaluation scores, and then how do they compare to those observed with non-computing engineering instructors? And of course, in fact, we found the sex of computer science professors correlates with their average teaching evaluation scores, meaning sex bias does exist. As you can see highlighted in a blue box, CS male professors are significantly rated higher than CS female professors in overall teaching. Men are rated on average about 0.27 points higher than their female counterpart. And although the difference may seem small, it actually represents a small to medium impact to professors. When we further break down the aggregate score, we notice a significant sex bias in some of the evaluation criteria. Female CS professors were rated lower in overall excellency in the handling of the course, their teaching, as well as their explanations of their material and how well they did in invoking interest in the subject for the students. And of course, some of these differences are seen to be more significant, as you can see with our p-values labeled on the slides. But as an overall, it impacts female CS professors more as a whole. Next, now that we have all this analysis completed, we wanted to compare those findings to any possible biases we found in any other engineering departments. However, we did not find any significant sex-related differences for non-computing engineering instructors. And we hypothesized that this may be because just sex biases in teaching evaluations may just actually be more prevalent in computer science. Next, we also looked at the possible biases that might exist in student instructors. So we wanted to now compare with the non-professors and see what we could find. And interestingly enough, we did also not find sex-related differences in the evaluations of student teaching evaluations, meaning we did not find sex biases for student instructors. And we find this actually very interesting, very much because we expected to see student instructors and professors facing the similar biases, especially because they're pretty much being evaluated by the same students or similar students, but we did not. So we hypothesized that this is because of one or all three of the following reasons. Maybe sex differences biases may increase with the perceived authority of the instructor, or perhaps there was a discrepancy in our methodology as we focus on classes with enrollment of over 40 students. And of course, there are some non-professors or student instructors that handle more discussion sections, which means that they would probably interact with fewer students, which may not be incorporated into our data. Or three, perhaps female student instructors just outperform their male counterparts, but further studies should be done in order to look into these differences. So just to summarize the implications of our study, we found additional evidence that sex bias computer science teaching evaluations do exist. They contribute to the greater sex bias in teaching evaluations that exist in academia. We also looked into sex bias for teaching evaluations submitted for non-professors, such as student instructors, but found no such biases. Female professors seem to hold most of the burden, unfortunately. In general, we observed that the magnitude of sex biases in teaching evaluations is specific to computer science. So again, thank you for listening to my presentation. And I think we can open the conversation for any discussion or questions.
Thank you very much, Priscila, for your nice presentation. So there is a question from the audience. So I have, Katia, do you want to?
Yes, absolutely. It's a quick question, actually. Maybe I missed it, but did you also say the percentage of female versus male professors in your data?
So there's about, yeah, go ahead. So the top of my hand, the numbers are not, so I'll go ahead if you remind going back to the slides. And she had the first question, you were asking how many percentage of male professors and female professors we had. So in this little table, we kind of separated how many female professors and male professors we have per each of the engineering departments and CS departments. So we did have many more male professors compared to females, but hopefully with our p-values that really offset and get more better analysis. Hopefully that answers your question a little bit.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. There is also a question from Miguel. Miguel,
yes.
do you have the?
Maybe I missed it, but in your surveys, do you know whether the answers came from men or women students?
Can you repeat it again?
In your survey, do you have access to knowing who voted for what? In the sense that, for instance, for example, males would be more dismissive of the quality of female instructors.
Yes, so the way that our survey is basically how we collect the data is that it has every student submit their evaluation for that particular professor. So then we do have the sex of that professor that they submitted it, and also whether they were a professor or they were just a student at
But
whatever
not from
section
the
of the course.
respondents.
Not from the respondents. All that is held anonymous.
There is a question from Letizia.
More than a question, I want to share what we are sharing on the chat, that we see that we have very much in common between us. And I don't know an answer, but I really see that there is a need to develop our research together, because if we use a lot of effort to make our studies to fit in existing venues, and I think maybe we should make a follow-up, not as long as one day, but a couple of hours meeting to discuss how we can progress, how we can help each other more. And in New Gain, Valentina, we are trying to do the same.
Absolutely.
To make this field into a scientific field. And since we don't have one of the presenters, I want to share some of my own challenges that are your challenges. That's why. So when working with this cost action EU Gain, it's a cost action about gender research in computer science. And sometimes I have even to hear sentences, but we are not doing research, okay? What are we doing? Or we should not do gender, okay? So it's so difficult, not only when you come to the point of publishing, but in the whole process. It's much more easy if you, I think for myself, if I just continue the topic of my PhD thesis for 20 years ago, it would be much more easy to know where to publish, to know what to do. But when you try to do this new things, I think we are trying to establish a new research field, this intersection between gender and computer science. Or I'm not even sure that it's correct to look at the intersection with software engineering. Maybe it's computer science in general, because what you are talking about, Priscila, is about, as I understand, is about computing, not specific to software engineering. So we have really a lot of questions to address. And my head today is
yeah. There is also Ari. Ari, do you want to add something else on chat?
Yeah, I have probably a million things to say, but I try to only say a few. So
we could organize an ad hoc meeting only with you. So.
Yeah. Just for this kind of a research, for example, really interesting thing to ask from people who were participating on answering this would be, if everything would be equal, would you prefer, for example, male or female teacher? Because that could reveal a lot from, if the person, for whatever reason, has a stereotype or something, would prefer male or female, that could reflect on the answers. Other thing that came to my mind, once again, a stereotype. If we assume that females are more as a teachers, what's the English word for being putting more effort on teaching, in the sense that it can reflect on tasks that students have to do for the course, which are more demanding than what the male professor is asking. So the male professor's course is more fun because it has less work to do. And that can reflect. If you ask from the students, was the course good or something like that, the response, they don't evaluate the course from the point of view that how deeply they educated themselves and all of this stuff. When I have been interpreting the students' answers to course feedback, you can read between the lines that having a little bit of a fun and all of this stuff is important for the students. And if you think from the learning perspective, that's not the point of courses. Of course, it makes things nicer to study, but just my 5 cents on ideas on this thing.
Yes, thank you very much, Ari. So just very quick, Miguel, do you want to add something on top on this one?
Yes. Do you think it might be the case that because in general women and men resort to different problem solving styles, could it be the case that because you have more students that are men, then they might feel that the problem solving styles used by the professors who happen to be women are different, and so they might be less comfortable with them?
I think one thing that I would think about is sometimes it could be just to be with comfort. The fact that there is many more just male students perhaps in the field in the computer science, they might just be much more comfortable with having a male professor being there instead of a female professor. There's a lot of, I am more curious to see what kind of thoughts they're going through, like what kind of like, for example, another thing that we had seen, and when we looked at more detailed kind of things inside the criteria, what their range, that they, for example, perceived the teachers to be, female professors to be less able to invoke interest in the students for some reason, like they were rated lower in that. And that was much more of a curiosity, like, is it because of a stereotype that they might perceive?
On the same note, maybe male professors have a harder time getting a female student interested because of the way our mind thinks. And
no, I totally agree.
That's why I was asking this question, because sometimes I struggle with, okay, I should have gender neutral examples in my class because they would appeal to everybody, and maybe that's a problem.
No, yeah, I do agree with that sentiment, in the sense that like it's complicated. I think like a lot of the things when it comes to like with gender, it gets very complicated and convoluted, and it sometimes feels like there is much more going on than just trying to keep it much more gender neutral. It'd be interesting to see like how many of the professors that are currently in Michigan, how much they try to do much more gender neutrality. Like maybe we could see more about if these biases are more present with professors who are not doing the best to keep it more gender neutral, versus more professors that are keeping them more like keeping much more of not of that certain sentiment. So it'd be, of course, like another aspect of the study that would be really interesting to see.
Thank you very much. So Anita, since